Y'all ready to start?
Yes. Yes.
How's everybody doing today?
Great.
Having a good time?
Yes.
And you got the other ribbon class already?
Yes.
Was that not informative?
That was great. It was.
So who went home with a headache? My first couple of years with the company at Subway, I felt every day. There's so much information, and just because I do one thing my way doesn't mean that that's what you have to do. There's so much of it that everybody's got 1,000 different ways of doing it. Whatever you find that works for you, do that. Just because Susie does it or Janie does it, doesn't mean you have to. If you're successful with it, stick with it. We're going to talk today just about river timing. And we're doing some real basic stuff with it because we feel like giving you a good base of information is where we all need to start. When I first started ribbing, the lady that was training me told me I had 3 months. I needed to rib for 3 months before I did anything else. I personally thought she was just cruel, but after doing that, it became so much second nature that I could see problems before they became a big problem. And that's one thing I try to emphasize to everyone. Don't knit faster than you can see, especially with ribbing. The little latches don't open when they're supposed to, you're gonna have a mess. And a lot of times you have to cut off, start all over again. So ribbing is very frustrating, especially when you're first starting. If you give yourself patience, time, and I also like to joke and tell people when I started ribbing is when I started drinking. Margaritas help a lot. But we want to first talk about our needle. So we're going to emphasize on the ribbing needle and a little bit of anatomy of the needle. We have the latch of the needle, which is right there. Then we're going to have the hook of the needle, which is right there. We're going to stress today from the pin of the latch, which I believe they call the crux. Why, I have no idea. From the pin of the latch on that ramp that goes down to the needle tip. That's where we want our yarn to fall when we're ribbing. As long as we're in there, preferably in the middle of it, we have a little bit of leeway back and forth. And the machines are built off of a free-floating system. So they've got a little bit of play with them all the way around. And purposely, they did that 100 years ago, 100 plus years ago, because they didn't use bearings. You know, it wasn't worth it. And when Pee Wee replicated the machine, he stayed that way, which I think was a testament to him because he wanted to keep everything as original as possible. You know, don't get me wrong, they have advanced some things like a hybrid system, which is amazing, by the way. How many of y'all have ever ribbed with the first generation system? You have only one person? You are the unlucky one, aren't you? I started with it, and the first generation system had 2 screws in the top of it. That's how you adjusted the timing line, was twist it until you got in the right position. It was a nightmare. Absolutely a nightmare. You move it just a little bit and it made a mile of difference on the machine. So I finally got mine right when I was learning, and Pee Wee asked me, well, how did you do that? And I said, I don't know, but I'm welding that sucker right there. So that is one that fortunately none of you will have to. With the hybrid system, I'm sure you all had little problems getting it in and out of the holder on it. Just a quick explanation. The pin here and the receptacle for it is 1/2 of a thousandth of an inch difference. That is about 1/5 the thickness of a piece of paper. So it is very tight, and it needs to be that way so you don't get that massive movement in your ribbing system. So be patient with it. Try to tell everyone when you're putting your ribber arm in, grab it by the spine. If you grab it up here, it's real easy to have it tilted one way or the other way. If you hold it by the spine, it stays up much straighter. Then when you insert it in, it goes in a lot easier. Don't force it. Once it starts to slide in, let it sit in a natural state, and from the side, pinch it, and it'll drop right down. It makes it a lot easier. You're not forcing it, and sadly, if you have ever forced it into it, the metal will gall, the aluminum will gall to each other, and it is a booger to get back apart after you've done that. I've had to beat mine apart a couple times. I have the benefit of going to the shop and fixing things. Y'all don't. So on our ribbing system, just quick anatomy, we have a 1/4 inch dry pin. And how many of y'all lost that one so far?
Oh, it falls out.
I think I got 4 or 5 of them in my kitchen drawer because I keep dropping the little buggers. And then our timing adjustment is actually done by this screw here. Most of them are a Phillips head screw. And there is a nut on the front of it, which is actually a jam nut. That is one, if you're traveling, when you get to where you're going, make sure that is tight. If it is not tight on there, it doesn't have to be killer tight, just good and snug. But if it is not tight on there, odds are your timing changed. Vibrations from your car driving and like that tends to loosen nuts and bolts up. So that's something to be aware of. We also have our tension for your ribber stitch right there. And it just got a nice little arrow that shows you which way is tighter, which way is looser. I have never had a use to move mine. I left it in the middle, and for 7 years, I've been knitting with it in the middle. Now, I'm sure there are uses for it. I don't get extravagant in things anymore. The most extravagant thing I ever made was a bikini. I have a tanning bed at home, and I made my girlfriend a bikini for the tanning bed. And that's the only time I ever adjusted that, and I only moved it a little bitty tiny bit, and it made a huge difference. We're also going to use our selector switch, and it has an in and out conveniently on it. And that black wire, well, that one's tight, is what moves it in and out. In play means it's in play, meaning your needles will move in and out of the ribbing system. Out of play means the needles stay in and they do not come out. So it is out of play. Keep in mind, when you put it over, I don't know if you all hear it or not, but when you put it in position, it will snap. That's what you need to hear. If you don't hear that snap, it's not all the way in. And the track inside of it, pull it apart real quick to show you. The track inside of it right here is ground, and it is polished so that it will line up with itself. If you don't hear that snap, it's not there and it's going to jam up. So if you don't hear that snap, back off, push it back into place until you hear that snap. That is probably one of the bigger problems that I personally had when I first started knitting. I got a little lazy. Maybe one too many margaritas, who knows? I didn't slide it back over and it kept jamming up. I took it apart, brought it into the shop, polished on it, and realized that I didn't have it all the way in play. This came up earlier today, so we'll mention it real quick too. A lot of y'all will probably see a difference in our ribber dials. We have two different ribber dials just by the difference of times. This is an older one, if you will, and it has a much smaller pocket inside of it. If you have one like this with a smaller pocket, you do not need a rick washer. We call it a rick washer because one of the guys at shop came up with the idea. If you have one of the newer style, it has got like a 2-inch pocket inside here. You need that rick washer. We had a problem when we first started making them that way, that the fins were super thin and the needles would sometimes hit those fins and bend them, then they would not work. So we cut that pocket bigger inside of it and had a problem with the needles laying over to the side and moving forward to go into play, and they would jam up. So we couldn't figure out what to do with it. Spent weeks fighting with it, arguing with it. Pee-wee talked to many different friends about it. And Rick, who is our gear hob at the shop, he's been there for 28 years, phenomenal. Y'all saw him at the tours, I'm sure. Great guy. He said, why don't you just put a washer in there so they won't go back too far? We were literally looking at redesigning the entire tappet plate to fix that problem, and Rick came up with a 38-cent washer that stopped the problem. So he's kind of the genius for the next 10 years. When you put your ribbing system together, I like to tell everyone to take it with the pin, the bottom of the pin, lay that on your hand, preferably on one of your fingers, so you support that. Let it sit in your hand at a natural state. We don't want to pinch it because then we've got binding. Then you want to take your rubber arm, set it right on top, and there's a tight tolerance on that as well, so be patient with it. Let it sit at a natural state. Then tighten up the jammed bolt on the side. You want to get that fairly snug. You don't have to put pliers to it, but fairly snug with your hands. Because when this drops down, you will get a gap in there. That's over-exaggerated, but just a few of you all I've seen this weekend that have had a gap in there. And that just creates a lot of problems because it lets your tappet plate pull up. Then your needles will jump out, you'll drop stitches left and right and not know what's going on. So always keep in mind, everything is supposed to be tight together. Now this one, we've already got it casted on. We've got yarn run through it, trying to save some time. So we're going to drop our ribbing system into it. Don't forget your pin. So I'm going to take my tappet plate and put it up against that pin. That's actually a drive pin. Then I'm going to put my fin. We have a fin here, and the cylinder has a pin. I'm sure you've all seen that. I'm so used to doing it in the front that I have a very hard time in the back. And a couple of y'all have done that, which really confuses me. It's all personal preference. So we're going to put that fin on the right-hand side of that pin. And there will be a black, red, blue, whatever color that's painted on there to show you where to put it in. So we're going to slide that in next to the pin. We're going to go in between the yarn. Sometimes if you're doing half pitch, you can't go in between the yarn. That's where you'll do a little bit of fighting with it. But we'll slide it down in. And we can hear that it dropped all the way down. And we'll tighten up the brass jam nut on the back of it. And you want to grab a hold of your river dial and give it a little shake. If you hear that clicking, I'm on the wrong side. Let me switch that over. If you hear that clicking, then you know that there's nothing obstructing your pin to your fin. That does not click, so I got it in the wrong position. There we can hear it. So we know it's in the right place. Tighten up the jam screw on the side of it. Then visually look, and I'm using a 36 river dial, which most of you do not have. Most of you have the 72. So just use every other needle on it. But you want to line up one of the slots on your river dial where you're gonna put needles in over the top of one of the empty slots on your cylinder. And that's how we're going to get everything lined up. I start with just one. We want to do quadrants when we're starting. So we check to make sure that it's knitting right here, over here, back here, and back here, because it will be a little bit different. Not drastically, but a little bit. And a little bit can go a long way. So I'm going to put in one needle, make sure it's far enough in to crank around, then slowly crank around, and I mean slowly crank around until I see my yarn start to fall on top of the needle, just like that. Now, if you look at that one, you can see that the yarn is falling a little bit forward of the center of that hook and where the latch is, which we want it to fall more towards the center to give us more room for error, if you will. But right now we're not going to adjust on this particular one because I want to see how it's doing in all four quadrants. If I adjust on it here, I might screw it up over here. So we'll put one 180 degrees from it, and we'll do the same thing. Just watch where it falls on that. I don't know if you can see that or not. That looks like we're falling just about in the center of it. So I do have a little bit of variance on it. I'm not going to fight with that. As long as we're hitting on that open area of that little ramp right there, that's where our yarn needs to be. And to adjust that, if you have to, we're going to take the pin out and we're going to go back to that screw that's on the top of your tappet plate. Now, I hope I'm not going to tell you this wrong, but if you screw it counterclockwise, that's going to advance the needle, meaning it'll come in and out faster. So I recommend to everyone do a quarter to an eighth of an inch to a quarter, not inch, excuse me, eighth of a turn to a quarter turn at a time. It's a lot easier with a Phillips screw in there because you can watch how much the little head of it moves. You can also use the little ribs on your screwdriver and see how much you're turning it over. So we'll advance this one a little bit just so we can see it. And anytime you move it, that nut in the front, snug it up. You don't want it to move back on you without your knowledge. Then crank around and see where it's falling. Oh, I forgot to put the pin in. Yeah, I'm a lot of help, aren't I? There we go. Of course, I'm going to drop half of everything over here, but that's all right. There it goes. Now it's pulling back in. Let me get over the side here where you can see. And you can see now I'm more towards the middle of that ramp on that pin. And that is where we want our timing to fall. Once you get the two sides right, we'll call that 3 and 9 o'clock, then we're going to do 6 and 12. I feel confident after watching it fall on both sides that I can put both of my needles in front and back and be in pretty good position. If you don't feel confident about it, which comes with time, do one. Then you can watch it, adjust if you need to, then do the other one. We'll put one. I dropped so many stitches I lost place. One in the front, and we'll put one in the back. Always make sure your latches are open. I'm sure we've all had that problem before. And we'll crank around real slowly until we see where it falls. And that one's a little bit far forward, but I know my two sides are in real good shape, so I don't want to adjust for just one needle. Then we'll crank around to the back, let it open, and watch where it falls on that too. That one falls really good. So we've got one that's slightly out of place. Not going to adjust anything on that because we know that the other three are falling really good. We'll load it up all the way and then knit all the way around. And if we see something acting up on us, then we will go ahead and adjust. But yes, ma'am.
So when you adjusted that screw before the river pin, which direction did you turn it?
I went counterclockwise, and that advanced the timing more.
Okay,
So
okay,
clockwise would retard the timing.
okay.
When you say advanced, you're saying that it's moving the yarn closer to the center of the river or farther out?
Closer to the center. It makes the needle come in faster or slower, yeah. And I hope I'm not telling you that backwards.
And then that was the, this 9 and 3, but what if it had been on 6 and 12?
We would make minor adjustments just like we did for the 9 and 3, and then check all 4 quadrants just to make sure we don't mess everything up.
So once you've adjusted it, that these were, if you adjusted again for these, is there a different screw for those?
No, it's the same adjustment on it because it's a free floating system and we'll move it a little bit. That's why we want a little bit of room for variations in it. You want to find the happy medium on all 4 quadrants. That's really what we're looking for, is the happy medium on it. Sometimes if you're doing a half pitch, that is really, really hard to find because now you have 72 needles in your cylinder, 72 needles in your river. That's a lot of needles. And you have to be 100% on your timing with that. So be very patient with that one. And always start with, I recommend everyone start with your scrap yarn, your waste yarn, get everything ironed out, put all your needles in everywhere, do 25, 50 rows to make sure you're confident with it, then take your scrap yarn off and go to your project yarn. And we don't want to waste our project yarn because we all know they can get kind of pricey for the project yarn. So we'll go ahead and load this up some more. Does anybody have any questions while we're doing this? No way.
Are river plates interchangeable between different kinds of machines?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Are the river plates interchangeable in terms of size, diameter with other kinds of machines?
There are some that are the antique Laguerres. These our machine was replicated off of, so they are. But when you talk about antique machines, you have to keep in mind that after 100 years, that metal changes. We've gotten a few people call that when we buy our cylinder, put an antique machine. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It depends on how out of shape it is. Because after 100 years, the cast iron metal doesn't stay round. It gets a little egg shaped, Lord only knows what happened to it in 100 years time. But yeah, pretty much so they are interchangeable. There are some like Laguerres that they use the same river needle, the Laguerres do, but they do not use the same cylinder needles. They're a little bit shorter, have a little bit more of what we call a belly to them on the needles. That's the only machines I can speak for. The auto knitter, I have never knitted on one, but I've been told they use the exact same needles.
I think they have a smaller diameter cylinder.
Do they? Okay.
Yeah, I saw one last weekend and it looked a little littler.
Yeah, the newer machines that have come out in the last 3 or 4 years, I know zero about. It's because this is what we do. I should say, a few people ask too, if once your timing is set for your 72-72, if you go to a 48-48 or the 54-54, will the timing be the same? And there's kind of a 2-part answer to that. Maybe. I don't know if you've all noticed it or not, but if you use scrap yarn and then go to project yarn, it changes. It depends upon how flexible the yarn is. It depends upon the temperature, the humidity. There's a lot of factors that go into it. So don't depend on going from your 72 to your 48 and it being spot on. You'll probably have to adjust a little bit. Magnetism. Has anybody ever experienced magnetism on their machine? Magnetism is probably one of the veins of our existence in the knitting world. We had a crank-in a few years ago where we had some electrical storms in the area, and everybody, literally everybody, could not knit. The little latches up here would not cooperate. And now, as we all know, the latches they do what they're supposed to do by the yarn. The yarn pulls them open, the yarn pulls them closed. So if you don't have yarn on there, they're not going to work. And when magnetism comes into it, it pulls the latch shut for no reason. Magnetism. Now, they call it a degausser or demagnetizer. That's the machine that solves that problem. At Cranky, we had the problems with, Rod and I spent literally 6 hours demagnetizing everything in that building.
How did you demagnetize those needles with that little?
The degausser,
I'm
yeah.
sorry?
the degausser.
Yeah, how did you do that with, Amazon makes one, they're $8.
Mhm.
And I'm just curious, what's the proper way to do your needles if you're,
Now, is that the one that's got a little red button on it?
Yeah.
I've worked with that one before. Found out the hard way. If you don't push that little red button, it does not demagnetize. It magnetizes them. So remember to push that little button. With ours, we have, it's not an industrial one, but it's a bigger unit, if you will. You put it on one side and literally slide it across to the other side, and it reverses the polarity in the metal, and it demagnetizes it. And I tell everyone, if you're demagnetizing your equipment, demagnetize everything. Your screwdriver, your wrench, your pliers, the pins, everything. Take no chances.
so you're saying push the button and slide your needles across?
Correct. Yes,
All
absolutely.
the time?
Now, I do a handful. You know, if your table's big enough on a demagnetizer, you can do 10, 12, 15, whatever fit on there, because it is strong enough to handle that. And it'll make some pretty horrid noises when you slide it across, at least ours does. But it does its job. It will not 100% demagnetize them, but it does enough where the latches do not act up. Now, check for magnetism, because we brought it up. It's not ribbing, I apologize for that part. But to check the magnetism, my favorite way is to get a compass. If you hold a compass up, take something that's magnetized and move it towards the compass, north will go to that because it's magnetic north. So that's a quick, easy way to check for it. And if you hold it out from your machine and pull it towards your machine and the compass pulls to your machine, something's magnetized. And that's why we tell people to demagnetize everything. Take your machine completely apart, take all your needles, demagnetize everything you can. The things on our machine that can be magnetized, obviously the 1/4-inch pin, the little arm up here. You don't have to take that arm out, just slide it across the degausser. It will demagnetize it. The nuts and bolts can get magnetized, so everything that you can.
And you have to have one of those degasser things?
That's the only way efficiently I can tell you how to do it, yes. Now, there are other ways that I've seen on the internet, but I don't know that I want to spend hours rubbing something on a piece of metal to get it to demagnetize.
So what causes your, besides the electrical storms, for just a normal person, for your machine to become magnetized?
We have had some experiences where folks that were knitting with their iPads or their laptops next to the computer, the electrical current in the computer can also magnetize things. So we tell people,
For my cell phone,
yeah,
and when I picked up my cell phone, I had my sister, I couldn't find my scissors, there were my scissors. Hooked on, I magnetized to my phone.
yeah, we tell folks if you're gonna have, I like to use my iPad to follow patterns and things with. If you're gonna use that 2 or 3 feet away, that way you take no chances.
The old technology is like, you better stay away from me.
Yes. Excuse me.
Darrel, the machine, are the new machines in your parts to be magnetized before they leave roll locker?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, we do a two-step process as we produce them, and when they come in the back, for me to assemble them, I assemble and test and, whatever. We all wear a lot of hats at the shop. We demagnetize things there. There are certain operations that we do, we know magnetize. If we cut something in a orbital saw, that will magnetize it, so we demagnetize those. We do it at the station where they're operating, and we also do it before we assemble. That's not to say that during shipping, because UPS is real kind. I'm sure you've all gotten boxes for them that would just beat to tar. They're the same way with our machines as well. Our old UPS guy, we got to know him pretty good, and we asked him, what good does this fragile sticker do? And he literally said, it means we'll throw it 10 feet, not 20. Are you kidding me? Okay, we've got it loaded up in, so we're going to go ahead and knit around. And again, don't knit faster than you can see, especially for your first half a dozen rows, if not more. When I was learning how to knit, it took me probably 3 or 4 hours to make one sock. because I did not want to drop anything. I'm terrible at fixing stitches. They look horrid, so I would rather not drop it here. Then I don't have to fix it later on. So I'm literally watching all of my latches, make sure that they open. I'm watching in the front of the ribbing, and I'm watching back behind it to make sure that the latches are closing and that it's working as it should. I kind of hope this one would be worse than this so that we could do a little bit more adjustments on it. But it's working fairly well. And I'm watching where the yarn falls all the way around. I'm sorry?
I'll go get my sheet.
Well, we are here today until probably 5, 6-ish. It depends on when Grayson says, go home before we leave. And we'll be here tomorrow all day. So if you have any questions, any problems, please don't hesitate to grab either one of us. That looks good. The other thing to watch that affects our ribbing too is position of our yarn carrier. We've adjusted a half a dozen or so of those this week too at the crank end. We like to tell people the position of the yarn carrier to the cylinder needles. You want about the thickness of a credit card. Now that is not gospel. That's just a good reference point to start with. You know, thicker yarns, you want to be a little bit further back. Thinner yarns, you can be a little bit closer. You have to find that sweet spot. It's not that difficult, but when you do make adjustments, baby steps. Baby steps with everything. If you're adjusting your ribber, make baby steps. Small adjustments, just do multiple of them until you get where you need to be. If you over adjust, going back is harder than it is going forward. Height of it, same way there. On the top of your ribber needles, you want about the thickness of a credit card off of the ribber needles to the bottom of your yarn carrier. Couldn't remember the name of it there for a minute. And that is really the basics of setting your ribbing. Anybody have any questions?
Yeah, the first one, I understood the bottom
Mhm.
with the thickness of the credit card, but I was thinking left to right between the two yarn carriers, but that's not what you're saying. The
Yep.
thickness of the credit card between the needles and that front plate?
Yep, right there.
Okay.
Yeah, about the thickness of the credit card. A lot of them, we started doing this somewhat recently, thanks to Mr. Pete. He's pretty amazing. I don't know if you all met him or not, but he's been involved in this project since day one. We started cantering that top back just by bending a little bit, and be gentle. It is brass, but that gives you a little bit more open access for your yarn to flow down through here. You want it closer at the bottom, a little bit further away at the top. That's why we started bending them backwards. Gives us a little bit more room to play with. And most of our processes in knitting, we're trying to trap that yarn in the position where it needs to be at. So if we find ways where we can force it to go where we want it to, that's what we're going to do. Any other questions? No? Well, that's really all that we have today.
That